If you enjoy this type of content, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to be part of the community. Now let's get started.
The noise came from the bottom of the ravine, a guttural sound, too low to be wind, too loud to be ignored. Petra dropped the machete in the snow and stood still, the vapor of her own breath disappearing into the cold morning air. It was early, still dark among the trees, and what she heard should not have been there. Petra was 26 and had been working for 3 years as an environmental monitor in a mountain reserve in the interior of Uganda. She knew every trail, every slope, every animal cataloged in that territory. But what she found when she went down the ravine that Tuesday in December was not in any report, any protocol, any memory of hers. A mountain gorilla, adult, lying on its side in the snow, something far too rare at that altitude not to be a sign of collapse. The dark fur was soaked, one of the hind legs bent at an angle that was not natural, and clinging to her chest, trying to hide under the enormous arm of the mother. A baby, small, trembling, the eyes open and fixed on Petra as if it knew she was the only decision between dying there or not. Petra did not scream. She did not step back. She stood still for a long second, looking at those two beings, and felt something tighten inside. It was not fear, it was recognition. The kind of thing you feel when you understand, without words, that you have arrived at a moment that will change something. The gorilla was breathing, but barely. She activated the radio with hands that trembled more from emotion than from cold. The base responded in 20 seconds. Petra asked for a field stretcher, thermal blanket, and a veterinarian on duty. While she waited, she took off her own coat and placed it over the baby without getting closer than necessary. The gorilla watched her with half-closed eyes, without moving, without reacting, without threatening. What had injured that animal? How had she reached there alone, in that ravine, in the worst winter of the last decade? And the baby, did it have other signs of trauma besides the fear stamped on its face? There were too many questions for that cold morning, and no answers yet. Only the cold wind in the ravine and the breathing of the gorilla, heavy, irregular, persistent. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell in the comments what you thought, and from which city or country you're watching. The veterinarian arrived 12 minutes later. His name was Dion, 40-something years old, large hands and a low voice, the kind of man who does not waste words near an injured animal. He evaluated the gorilla in silence, kneeling in the snow, fingers moving through the fur with professional care. When he stood up, his face said everything before his mouth. The hind leg had been hit by something metallic. A snare, the illegal kind, reinforced steel, the type used by poachers who had been operating on the edges of the reserve for months without being identified. The snare had been removed, probably by the gorilla herself, in an effort that must have cost hours and an absurd amount of pain, but the damage was done. Tendon compromised. Infection beginning. Petra looked at the wound and felt the anger rise slowly from her stomach to her throat. Poachers in that area were not new. There were records of traps found in the last 2 years, always on the same routes, always dismantled before anyone could trace the origin. The enforcement team had submitted 3 reports to the reserve administration asking for reinforced patrols. All 3 had been archived with the same vague justification: limited budget. Petra knew those reports because she had written 2 of them. While Dion prepared the light sedation to stabilize the gorilla and allow the transport, Petra stepped a few meters away and kept looking at the baby that now held the edge of the thermal blanket with its tiny fingers. The animal did not cry, did not vocalize. It only watched, and there was in that silence something that weighed more than any scream. The transport took 40 minutes. The gorilla was placed in a heated structure in the rehabilitation center attached to the base. The baby refused to separate from the mother, and no one insisted. Dion worked for 2 hours without stopping, cleaning the wound, stabilizing the leg, setting up the 4. Petra stayed outside the room, sitting in the cold corridor, unable to leave. When Dion came out and said she had survived the most critical night, Petra did not feel relief. She stayed sitting in the corridor looking at the floor without really seeing anything. Then she went to the window and looked at the dark forest outside. There was a question that would not leave her mind, one she had not said out loud, afraid of what the answer would mean. Why had that gorilla come down alone to the ravine, injured, far from the group? Gorillas do not do that. Never. Petra spent the night at the base. It was not a conscious decision. She simply did not leave. At 3 a.m, she was sitting at the table in the monitoring room with the laptop open, 2 years of field records on the screen, and a cup of coffee that went cold without her noticing. She started with the date. She worked backward, mapping every trap found in the reserve since January of the previous year. 17 records, distributed across 4 distinct routes. When she overlaid the points on an offline map, something jumped out that no one had noticed, or that no one had bothered to look for. All the traps were positioned less than 200 meters from trails with vehicle access. It was not coincidence. It was logistics. Whoever was doing that knew the terrain and had a way to enter and leave quickly without being seen. Petra printed the map, marked the points with a red pen, and kept looking at it for a long time. In the morning, she went to Dion's lodging and knocked on the door. He opened with the face of someone who had slept little, and she walked in without being invited, placed the map on the table, and pointed to the red circles. Dion studied the paper in silence, adjusted his glasses, studied it again. "Did you take this to the administration?" he asked. "Not yet," Petra replied, "because the administration has already archived 3 requests for reinforcement. This time I want to arrive with more than a map." What she did not say to Dion, what she kept to herself while assembling each piece of that puzzle, was that one of the trails marked on a map passed less than 300 meters from where she had found the gorilla, and that on that trail, 2 days before the rescue, an unregistered vehicle had passed. She had the record in the system, a forgotten piece of data in an access control spreadsheet that no one reviewed. Someone entered the reserve, someone who knew exactly where to go. Petra returned to the rehabilitation center in the early afternoon. The gorilla was conscious, still weak, but with her eyes open and her breathing stable. The baby was lying next to the mother's body, one of its hands holding her fur with a firmness that seemed like refusal to let go, refusal to accept anything different from that. Petra stood at the entrance watching the two of them and made a silent decision. She was going to find out who did that, and this time it would not end in a report. The vehicle plate took 3 days to be traced. Petra did not have direct access to the vehicle registration database, so she asked a friend in the police in Kampala for a discreet favor. When the answer arrived by message on a Thursday night, she read the screen twice, 3 times, unable to process it. The vehicle was registered in the name of Oswald Fun, Regional Coordinator of Environmental Enforcement, the man responsible for receiving and approving the patrol reports of the reserve, the same one who had signed the archives. Petra sat down on the floor of the corridor, literally sat, right there, with her back against the cold wall, the phone in her hand, and the feeling that the ground had moved under her feet. It was not an anonymous poacher. It was someone from inside, someone who knew about every report, every request for reinforcement, every monitored trail, because he was the one who received that information first. He was the one who left the routes open. She called Dion. He arrived in 8 minutes, still with his jacket button crooked. Petra showed the message without saying a word. Dion read it, closed his eyes for a second, opened them. He said only, "Do you have the access record?" "I do. With date, time and plate." "Then it does not go to the regional administration," he said. "It goes straight to the National Conservation Authority."
If you are enjoying this story, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your thoughts and where you are watching from. Your interaction helps this message reach more people.
And it goes with everything documented. It took 2 hours to assemble the dossier. Petra organized every trap record, the map with the routes, the vehicle access log, the 3 archive reports with Fun's signature, and a veterinary report signed by Dion describing the injury and its probable cause. They sent everything by encrypted email at 11 at night. The next morning, 2 federal agents arrived at the reserve without notice. They did not go to the local administration. They went straight to the monitoring base, asked for the original files, and spent 4 hours inside there. Oswald Fun was formally notified that afternoon, removed from a position that night. Petra found out through the same friend in Kampala. She received the message while she was sitting next to the gorilla's enclosure, which now stood up for shorter periods, supporting her weight carefully on the treated leg. The baby had started to move a few meters away from the mother. Small hesitant steps, testing the world with its own feet for the first time. Petra looked at it and could not hold back the tears. Not a single one of them. 6 weeks later, the gorilla received the name the team had chosen, Imara. In Swahili, it means firm. It seemed right for an animal that had torn off its own snare, crossed the snow with a baby on its chest, and survived the coldest winter in a decade. The leg had healed beyond what Dion expected. He said that with his usual low voice, but with a smile he could not hide. Imara would return to the forest. Not immediately. There were still protocols, observation, gradual adaptation. But she would return, and the baby, whom the team informally called Kibbo, had become a curious and restless animal that tested the limits of everything around it. On the day of the release, Petra arrived before everyone else. She stood outside the enclosure with the sun still low, the cold air cutting her face, watching Imara in silence. The animal was sitting in the center of the space, its eyes scanning the line of trees with an attention that seemed like recognition. The door was open at 7 in the morning. Imara did not run out. She stood still for a long moment in the doorway, as if she needed to confirm that it was real. Then she took one step, another. When she reached the first line of vegetation, she turned her body once, only once, in the direction of where Petra was. It was not gratitude in the sense that humans assign to the word. Petra knew that, but it was something. A silent recognition between 2 beings who met at the worst possible moment and managed to get through it together. Kibbo came out right behind and disappeared among the trees in seconds, without looking back, the way babies do. Petra stood there until she could no longer see either of them. Then she took a deep breath, put her hands in her pockets, and walked back to the base. There was a new report to write, this time with a different recipient, firmer language, and evidence that no one would be able to archive. The reserve needed reinforced patrols. The animals that lived there could not depend on a morning with snow and someone willing to go down a ravine. They depended on systems that worked before the breaking point. Petra had decided that was what she was going to build. If this story touched you in some way, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell in the comments where you're watching from. Every message makes a difference and helps this story reach more people.